Celeste, it's nearly 7:30. Is everyone on?
We're just counting people, counting heads. One.
We have everybody.
Is Mr.
but
Snyder
Mr.
back?
Snyder. I don't see him back yet.
When you say back,
he was here.
He checked in at 7 and then he logged off, so he should be here momentarily. Otherwise, you have all of council.
All right. Well, in a moment we'll proceed, and hopefully he'll be able to join us shortly. Let me.
Are we live?
It's currently not. It's not live yet. It's not live yet.
Let me know when he joins. There he is. Okay, let's go ahead. It's 7:30.
He's live.
Are we ready to go with the TV and the like?
Yeah, they've turned it live, so Granicus should be catching up. And since it's a work session, I'll read the meeting notice and do roll call when you're ready, Mayor.
All right. Well, it's 7:30. I think I'm ready. Let's go ahead and get started with the Monday, April 18th, 2022 meeting. It's a work session of the Falls Church City Council. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Mester, who will read some required notices and do roll call. Ms. Mester?
Thank you, Mayor. This virtual meeting of the City Council is being held pursuant to and in compliance with the Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3708.2, as well as state and local legislation adopted to allow for the continued government operation during COVID-19 declared emergency. All participating members of City Council and other boards will be present at this meeting through electronic means, and members of the public can view the meeting at www.fallschurchva.gov/councilmeetings and on FCC TV, Cox Station 11, RCN 2, and Verizon 35. City Council work sessions are conducted to allow council members to discuss upcoming legislation and policy issues. The public is not generally invited to speak. Public comment may, however, be sent to City Clerk at fallschurchva.gov. All comments are provided in full to the members of council and will be summarized at the next regular City Council meeting. For roll call, let me start with Ms. Connolly.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Ms. Leon?
Here.
Ms. Sean-Siscott?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
And Mayor Tarter.
Here.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And so we've got a budget-filled work session tonight. Lots of questions, hopefully lots of answers. And so why don't we go ahead and get to it. Before we do, just briefly, though, thank you to city staff, rec and park staff for a very exciting and well-attended Easter egg hunt on Saturday. But did a very nice job, everyone there. So with that, why don't I go ahead and go turn it on over to you, Mr. Shields.
Okay, well, thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. Yeah, I think we had over 750 or 800 people come to join the festivities on Saturday. So thank you for noting that. It was a big event. So for tonight's work session, really, it's the only thing on the agenda is to work through some of the policy questions that the council has raised in prior work sessions. And ultimately, kind of this is all working towards a markup where the council will decide the adds, deletions, amendments to what has been proposed, and hopefully that will all be completed at your next meeting on April 25th, and then that will allow us to prepare the documents for final public hearing and final consideration on May 2nd. So, Ms. Mester, would you be able to call up the slides that we have? Okay, so next slide, if we just advance to the next slide, and this will give us just a summary of what we want to cover, and just a few slides that we have with information on these items. And I do want to note at the outset that we are joined in this meeting by with a couple of key staff members. So for the car tax and senior tax relief, we do have the treasurer on the call. For library hours, for that part of the discussion, we do have our library director, Jenny Carroll. We have our deputy chief of police, Major Jawan Chetri, just to discuss use of cameras and technology for law enforcement, speed enforcement, photo red, and school buses in the city, and then policy discussion on the use of capital reserves. These are all items that came up at your last meeting. Cindy, you have your hand up. Did you want to?
I just wanted to
mention
note that Mr. Tom Clinton is located in chambers with me. If there's a question, he'll be available
thank
as
you.
well.
So Tom is the lead on car tax, so that's very helpful to know. So my plan is I'll walk through these items and just try to provide a high-level summary, and then we can pause after each one, and we have our subject matter experts to answer any questions on each of them. So, and again, we'll kind of end up tonight with a kind of a mock-up of what a markup spreadsheet would look like for the City Council, and we'll start doing that work tonight if there is consensus on some of these items. So next slide. So for the car tax, this is the same slide we used last week, and what's highlighted in blue is what the staff recommendation is. And so we talked about various different methods to address the rather significant, but also we think short-term increase in assessed value for vehicles. We have built a budget assuming 6.6% growth and personal property as a whole, which includes business tangible and the vehicle tax. If we keep it at the current rate of $5, we would have a surplus. And to kind of hit the mark at where the budget is at 6.6%, the Commissioner of Revenue has run the numbers on this, kind of reevaluated the tax assessment rolls that we have that we anticipate we'll be sending bills out for back in, up in September, and the bills are due in November, if I have those dates right. At any rate, next fall, we would propose a rate of $4.30, which would be a 70-cent increase. We believe that's the most administratively simple, but we also think that that's the easiest to explain to taxpayers. We are a bit concerned if we do the by ordinance, reduce the assessment, that it's going to cause confusion. People will kind of have more arguments over the assessed value of their vehicle, whereas the adjustment to the rate will be clear, easy to explain, and something that I think our taxpayers will react better to at the counter when they're dealing with the Commissioner of Revenue and the Treasurer. So let me stop there and see if we have any questions on this. If we carried out this, then in the tax ordinance, we would strike a line through $5 and write in $4.30 for vehicles. Business tangible would stay at the $5 rate.
Questions, comments? I mean, to me, go ahead, Letty. Letty, then Mary Beth.
Thank you. Like property tax increases, do we know what a 6.6% increase for the average car owner might look like as it is?
Tom, would you be able to answer that question?
He's
Average
coming
might be
up to the
tough
microphone right now.
Okay, right.
That might be harder to do than with residential property.
I don't have that offhand because we've got cars in so many different levels, but assuming most people have a semi-new car, they're up pretty significantly, and it's across like upper 80s to 90% of the cars will be affected. Some more than others. The new bigger SUVs and the pickup trucks, it's going to be quite substantial. People are obviously paying over MSRP and kind of, but they'll kind of know what they're paying. It's the people with kind of older and mid-range cars, they'll be kind of surprised that they've gone up so much. And that's, I think, the challenge. If you're not in the market, hopefully you've read, the newspaper or you've seen it on TV. So it's not a total shock to you, but you're also, if you're not shopping and in the market, you probably doesn't hit as close to home. But I think we're all kind of concerned about cars being up, new and used ones, as well as real estate. It's kind of a unfortunate, different disciplines, but is going to affect, pocketbooks and wallets.
Got it. So is the main downside with changing the tax rate is obviously these elevated car values probably aren't going to be a forever thing, right? We expect cars to depreciate a lot like they normally do. Is that we might have to add to the rate pretty significantly in the coming years?
Well, we think this is pretty short term, and really, we're supposed to assess vehicles at market value, just like the real estate assessor is supposed to. We're not supposed to do it and then, cut it by, 20%. That's really the lever that the council has, that we can lower the rate, and the code allows that, while also not discounting the tangible, which has nothing to do with the chip problem. So it kind of is more narrow, more specific, and is easily adjustable. Maybe we have to do 2 steps to get back up to $5, but we can analyze that each year and tweak only the rate. We don't want to, it's all over the map. There's 130 some jurisdictions in Virginia, and people were, suspending the decal or license fee. People were going to a lower assessed value, a percentage of the assessment, or lowering the rate, or some combination of those things, getting really hard to explain to taxpayers, whereas we think this will be very linear on a tax bill. If we did an initial assessment and then took 80% of it, and we had the 2 figures on the bill, and then the computation below that or if we just had one or the other values, would people understand which one were they paying on? I just think this is a little bit simpler to digest. It's much more easier to do in Munis, and we don't have to do an ordinance. So kind of for a combination of the reasons, and you get into these things, you're not always sure what the answer is, and some people had to decide weeks and months ago. Whereas now we can kind of see what everybody else is doing, and we can do some lessons learned, and the General Assembly passed something that allowed us to just change the rate. So it really, having a later budget approval really worked in this particular challenge to our benefit. I hope that wasn't too much.
Yep. I think you partially answered this. So for our immediate neighbors, I don't know that Fairfax was looking at that assessment ratio approach, but
Yes.
for everyone, do we know what Arlington, Alexandria?
Yeah, we're tracking that right now, and of course, people have moved back and forth, but a lot of them didn't have this very late-breaking General Assembly option. So they kind of had that already in process. Fairfax County's doing that. Just because our neighbors are doing it doesn't necessarily mean we should do it. And I believe the city attorney had some concerns about whether it was legal to reduce the assessment.
That's it. Thank you. I think it'd be great to be able to at least explain maybe for the average car owner what that 6.6% growth still means for their bottom line tax bill. So that would be helpful. That's it. Thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Conley?
I just have 2 quick questions. One is, what we're doing here, it's still going to increase a little bit with this reducing the tax rate, correct?
Yes.
Exactly the same as last year.
You don't want to lose money on it, but we're trying to essentially break even.
Okay, that's good. And then my other question is, I think right before you started talking, Wyatt mentioned other things that are assessed with personal property tax.
So the 2 are business tangible and vehicles.
Vehicles.
Tom, is that correct, or are there
Yes.
any others?
Yeah, so that would be,
tangible doesn't have the same increase in value that cars do this year.
No, and they depreciate at a schedule that's a pretty aggressive depreciation rate, and so we don't think we have the similar sort of shock that anybody on the business tangible side would experience.
Okay,
Correct.
So then our ordinance will have 2 separate lines in it, which is different than it has before, correct?
Correct. That's right.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Ms. Leon? Followed by Ms. Hiscott.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I really support, when it comes to this decision, making this with implementation and the ease of explaining it to taxpayers in mind. So I think in your response to Ms. Hardy, you really thought through in terms of, how do we go about this operationally with execution that's clean, that's in line with what supports legality. I think when I take a look at the budget questions, page 6 of 31, if we take a look at $4.30, it isn't the lowest when compared to other regions, right? So I think I was concerned about reducing the assessment to 85%. I think reducing the tax rate is something that I'd be more supportive of also. And that's it for me.
All right, thank you. Ms. Hiscott?
Thank you. My questions were answered already, and I just wanted to state that I too am supportive of changing the tax rate versus the assessment for all the reasons that have already been mentioned. Thanks. Thanks, Tom.
All right, any other conversation around this aspect of the budget?
Mayor, yeah, so I want to go back to Wyatt. Wyatt, was your budget built on the assumption of this reduction in the amount of tax revenue?
Yes.
Okay.
So the only thing that was not resolved at presentation time was whether we would do this 85% of value approach or reduce the rate approach. And so that was the discussion tonight.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so we want to keep moving then, Mr. Shields?
Yes, sir. So Cindy, next slide. And so I'll turn this over to our city treasurer, but let me just give a quick overview. What is the chart? This is the chart that was sent out in the council question responses on Friday. So these numbers, hopefully you might have had a chance to look at them over the weekend. But essentially what is being proposed is to expand the eligibility for tax relief. It is modeled after the approach taken by Fairfax County. And the estimated cost of making each of these changes would be in total $65,000. So we had said kind of in the 30s the last time we discussed this, and with the treasurer working through her knowledge of the population and the people who are in touch with her office regularly on this issue, that is her educated estimate of what the increase in cost would be with these policy changes. Jody, would you like to just kind of talk it through briefly, and then we can answer any questions?
Before we go to that, I think Ms. Conley and I may have a disclosure we'd like to make. Ms. Conley, would you like to go ahead?
Will you go first? Because I have to pull mine up.
Sure. I make the following statement before City Council's consideration of TO 22-04, TO-2205, TO-2206, TO 22-07, 22-08, TO 22-10, relating to the FY 2023 budget. My wife's an employee of the Falls Church City School Board, and therefore I'm a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by these matters. I can participate in them fairly, objectively, in the public interest.
And I make the following statement before City Council's discussion of TO 22-04, TO 22-05, TO 22-06, TO 22-07, TO 22-08, and TO 22-10, relating to the FY 2023 budget. I am an employee of the Falls Church City School Board and a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by these matters. I can participate in them fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
All right, thank you. Sorry for the interruption, Ms. Acosta. Would you like to proceed?
Sure. I think Cindy's bringing up it's from page 1 of the answers that Kieran sent out to council. This is sort of a more updated chart. In it, it tells you, like, if we implemented, increase the income limits for relief, which is the abatement program. If we added 25% relief category, as Fairfax County had, if we increase the net worth limit on deferrals and we increase the income limit on deferrals, then that last column over there shows you the estimated number of participants under if we did the new brackets and changed the deferral a little bit. If we increased our income limit for deferral only to 110,000, that would be the most generous of all of our surrounding jurisdictions. I think Arlington's is like 109.5. I think Alexandria's is 100,000 even. But anyway, based on my best estimate, this is what we would come out with. And we even added in about $15,000 in case we get any. It would allow us maybe up to 2 new disabled veteran applications. And we do seem to be getting more of those each year. So we said, okay, let's, estimate that we're going to get 2 new disabled veteran apps too. And that would bring the total up to 65,000. So we think it's a good program. It gives more relief. It brings a few new people in, and that's just based on the applications we've received and the applications we've denied. We feel like we could pick up maybe 3 new program participants by doing this. But again, that's an estimate. But does anyone have any questions?
All right, so Miss Leon and then Miss Hardy. I think you're muted.
So sorry. My first question is, do we have a sense of the need, like the number of folks that could be served or benefited from this? Like if I total the sums, right? Are they greater than, less than, to what is the total need?
It's
right,
greater
in the community?
It's greater than, I think,
Okay.
by 3 or 4. I think the estimated number under the new brackets is like 44, 45. And the current ones are 41, I believe. And what we're seeing a lot of, and this is one of the reasons why we increased that net worth limit under deferral only. It was 530,000 and we made it 600,000. But we're seeing a lot of people who they've moved here, many years ago, and they're sort of house poor, right? Their house is worth a lot of money, but their income isn't that great, and they don't want to move. They want to age in place. They want to stay here. There's one woman in the deferral only program. Her house is over $1 million in value, or assessed value, and she only qualifies for deferral. But her income is less than 60,000. So, and she couldn't even get a reverse mortgage because if she did, they would not allow her to defer her taxes. So there is a need out there for people like that. So, and we feel like this better serves those people too.
Yeah. And last question on that net worth limit. I've seen in other areas that it's at 340. It didn't quite reach out to those other areas. Why 340 versus 400K? Just a question for you from an education perspective from my side. How did we get to the 400? Was that a recommendation based on research or just your input? Help me catch up to you on that.
It was the last time that we revamped this program, which I believe was 2, maybe 3 years ago now. And because we were at 340 as well.
Okay.
And sort of the general trend across the region, it was to go up from that, because 340, I mean, it's just, a buck doesn't go as far as it used to, right?
Yeah. So this was adjusted a couple of years ago. That helps kind of frame the reference. Yes. It used to be 340. Okay. Right. I'm good. Thank you. Okay. I'm totally supportive of this. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Miss Hardy?
Thank you. I also am very supportive of it and glad to see the changes. So phrased a little differently, Jody. So if we gave you more money based on the inquiries that we've gotten, how many additional people could we help? Because I think, again, most of us feel like the people who need it the most really should be supported here, especially in light of the rising tax bills. And so if we were willing to put more than, say, 65,000, I mean, how many more people we could help? Because based on my math, it seems like currently we're serving 42 people. With the expansion, we're getting to 45, so a net increase of 3 people. And there's some movements and more people getting relief versus deferral. But overall, just a net increase of 3 people. It feels like we should be doing more, frankly.
Right.
And so where else could we expand? Is it in the net worth, for example? Bring that up, because I looked at Loudoun. I think Loudoun has much higher net worth limits, I think, depending on where your income is. Is that an opportunity for us, for example?
Absolutely, we can do that. There's one person in the program who I've talked with extensively about this, and she says, look, my husband and I they don't have any children. They've saved, all their lives. They live in their home. They're in the program, but their net worth is a little higher. And she said, look, I don't want to have to, like, what if I need to go into long-term care? I need to, at least have some money left. I don't want to draw down all of my net worth assets to just pay taxes, and then I won't have anything left if I do need help as I get older, if I do have to move out and move into assisted living or something. So I think it would be helpful to increase those income limits. Net worth limits.
Do we have a sense of like how many more additional people we could help in that situation? Like, do you find that a lot more inquiries come in those high net worth, like deferral kind of candidates that we aren't able to serve currently?
Yes, and what we saw the last time we did the expansion was we saw more people coming into the deferral only. Maybe they were 65, 66, they were more newly retired, their incomes were higher, and so then they qualified for deferral only. They were still under 100,000 a year, but they were over our limit for relief. So I would expect to see more people like that, newly retired, maybe still working even, and not fully retired yet, but able to qualify for the program. So if we increase the net worth limit, I think that would definitely help those people. How many?
Yeah, how many, and then how much it would cost the program, I guess we don't have the answer to, but I guess I would support looking into that, because I know from a policy perspective, when we last added deferral, I guess a couple of years ago, and redid this, I think we debated plenty about the pros and cons of deferral, and I think we all came out where we thought deferral was a good idea. It was a good idea for the city as well. So if possible, and if we have money in contingency, I would support going beyond the 65,000 so we can help more people.
Okay. I can put some feelers out there. I mean, today was the deadline for people turning in their applications for our next fiscal year. And so we've been talking to a lot of these people. So we can see like if they know of anybody else who's out there, who might fit in these categories, and try to get you some kind of idea, of how many people we could help if we did that.
Thank you.
If we expanded the net worth. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Thanks. So my question is to Wyatt. The proposal calls for an additional 65,000. Was that budgeted by you?
No.
No.
So this, if this were enacted, or if the council wanted to proceed with this, this would show up on your markup as an increase in, with an impact to the budget. So this would need to come out of contingency. That $1 million, 1,020,000 contingency that's built into the tax rate as proposed, or we'd need to cut spending elsewhere. One of those two options.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. I think I want to land the same jump that Letty took, so I won't go into too much detail, but just to preface my thoughts on this. To me, this is not something that we are doing for these people that we're helping, but this is rather a program that does something for the community by keeping folks in their houses who otherwise would probably sell out and give up their usually smaller house to a demo that would replace it with, a lot that would be stripped bare and an enormous house in its place, which would come with stormwater implications and traffic implications and so forth. So in terms of the policy that I would like to see us pursue, I'd like to see us be much more ambitious, at least in getting some numbers. So that's where Letty, I think, was going. I'd like to see the net worth limit doubled to 800,000, and the income, I'm relying on Jody to tell us, but certainly, I'd be open to look at an increase just because of what was said earlier. The amount of money that we're talking about here doesn't go as far as it used to. I mean, somebody with a net income of or a net worth of less than $1 million has basically probably got maybe not enough to carry them through their retirement and advanced healthcare needs, and so we don't want to be taking that money from those folks for their use later on. So I would like to see us, if we could, by the time we do markup next week, look at what kind of cost would be estimated if we change the net worth and the income limits to be, significant enough to move the needle higher and faster than from low 40s to mid 40s. I'd like to see us get somewhere in the 70s and 80s in terms of the number of people that we're helping. Thanks.
Ms. Conley?
I like all of this, Jody, and I thank you for putting it together. And I really want to put a shout out here to the fact that 3 years ago, we had a working group that met like 10 times and went through sheets and sheets and sheets of data that Jody and Nikki, her deputy, pulled. And because of all that work that was done previously, this is so much simpler. So I just want to, as we look at other programs, I really want to put a plug in for getting things right the first time so that when you do have to revise them, it's so much simpler. So thank you, Jody, for being able to pull these up quickly. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Sure, thank you. And you're absolutely right. And I feel like that's why I feel pretty confident in our estimates here because of all the work we did before, right? Where we studied all of this, you know, backwards and forwards. So thanks.
All right, so if you could, maybe you heard some of the questions and guidance and recommendations, requests. If you can run some numbers, you know, at different levels, higher levels, and report back to the city manager so that he can report back to us about the fiscal implications for that, we can consider it at our next meeting.
I will, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all your hard work. We appreciate it.
Sure.
Mr. Fields, you want to move to the next item?
Sure. So next up is a discussion of the library budget, and I'll just summarize real quickly. And our director, Jenny Carroll, is on the call and can provide much more context. So what is in the budget that is before the council is a proposed one additional FTE for the library that would be embedded with the library staff, and that'd be a new technology librarian. Now, when we worked this out, it did not correlate directly to hours, because that really gets into the next slide in terms of what's needed to impact the opening hours discussion. So currently the budget is built around the library being open 54 hours per week, which is the change that was enacted in December. Earlier this year, in February. So next slide, Cindy. And so in terms of increasing hours, there's a proposal for adding 2 hours, and then another proposal for adding 4 hours in the positions that would be needed in order to sustain that. And so let me stop there and let our library director speak to this, provide some additional context, and then Q&A from there.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. So for 56 hours, we would either add a library assistant to, it's basically one FTE, it's 40 hours, but to 2 of our current part-time staff for a total of 63,000, or adding a library assistant 1 FTE and 1 FTE for about $75,000, and that position could possibly be new staff. It could also possibly be adding hours to current staff. But definitely the library assistant 2s, we have 2 staff members who would like to increase their hours, which would be an easier option. We don't have to go through hiring and training somebody. They're already trained, they're already ready to go. For the 58 hours, it would be doing both of those, increasing the library assistant 2 positions and also adding the library assistant 1 position at 1 FTE. So are there any other questions?
All right, well, let's find out. Mr. Snyder?
Yes, again, for the city manager, what did you budget here?
You're muted, Wyatt.
Thank you. So what is in the budget is the first slide where the library is open for 54 hours per week, and what is in the budget is an additional library technology or a technology librarian position. And the reason we went in that direction as opposed to expanding hours is really twofold. One, at least from my perspective, and I'd love for you to hear our director's perspective directly, for her views, but having additional technology support in the library would also help the entire organization. I think it will provide a higher level of service for the library directly, which is a very high technology user, but it also will allow our ITS division, which is central and serves all of the city's departments, to provide a incrementally higher level of service for the rest of the organization as well, by having this embedded expertise with the library staff that will serve as a liaison to ITS and kind of simplify some of their tasks. That was the thinking behind taking this approach. It had kind of a whole city benefit as well as direct benefit for the library.
So to expand the library hours then from 54 to 56 or 58, that would be an additional $63,000. Am I reading that right?
That's right.
138.
That can't be right, because it's the same amount of money for 2 hours versus 4 hours. So what's right here?
So the difference is in the first bullet point, it is adding the library assistant 2 positions or the library assistant 1 position. In the second bullet for 58 hours, it would be adding both the library assistant 2 and the library assistant 1 positions.
So Wyatt just a minute ago said that we were still at 54 hours, but we're spending $75,000 more. So under Wyatt's proposal, we would not add hours at all, but add an additional employee, but get no additional hours. Where under what you're proposing is, in both cases, we get additional hours for the expenditure of the additional person. And then the issue is, for 2 more hours, we'd be spending $63,000 more. So I'm trying to get clarification as to what's in the manager's budget versus what we see on the screen.
Sure. So if you go back to the first slide, Cindy, that technology librarian position, so that position would stay in the budget, and we would also, to increase hours, would add one of those options on the second slide. So the library technology, or the technology librarian position, provides relief on the management side of the staffing spectrum. The library assistant 1s and 2s are on the other side of the staffing spectrum. So they do primarily service desk provision. The library assistant 2s also provide programming and services as well. So it provides relief throughout the staffing spectrum, not just on one end or the other. In addition, the technology librarian would consolidate many of the tasks that management team members are currently providing. All of those tasks are distributed throughout the management team members, on top of all of their other tasks that they do.
So then the proposal here is to add employees, either 2 part-time, increasing 2 part-time, or add 1 over and above what the city manager has provided. So the city manager's addition of the tech does nothing for hours. So in order to get an increase in hours, we're spending either $63,000 or $148,000. To me, that's not many hours for a whole lot of money. So I need more on this for sure. But I'm just trying to figure out, if we go for anything on that screen, what is the addition that we're going to have to find, either in savings or from whatever reserves we have. So the choice is $63,000 or $75,000 or $148,000. Do I have that right?
I'm not exactly sure where you're getting the $148,000.
Well, I'm adding 63 to 75. Maybe I didn't add it right, but
that would be $138,000.
All right, 138. You got me. So it's 138,000. So,
Correct.
okay. I just want to get the numbers straight here. So what the proposal is. So if we didn't do the tech, that would save us how much, Wyatt?
That would, so one option would be, and Jenny and I haven't really talked about this in detail, but if you switched out the tech for the library assistant one, I think Jenny, what is the salary for the tech position? I don't have that number right in front of me.
So the tech salary position is different from what got budgeted. So what got budgeted was $80,000, $60,000 for benefits and $20,000. I'm sorry, $20,000 for benefits and $60,000 for salary. That would not be at the rate that we would hire. So I think it was in the $100,000 range to do the tech completely, the tech librarian position.
So to compare numbers, the tech position, which is currently in the budget, is at $100,000, and the assistant is at $75,000.
And I don't know that I'd necessarily, I mean, having the technology librarian provides a certain amount of relief in a different spectrum. I mean, in a different part of the spectrum. And then increasing the service desk hours provides relief on another part of the spectrum that would also increase hours. Our original ask for unmet needs was a deputy director, the library assistant 2s and the library assistant 1s to increase hours. And it was to provide relief across the spectrum of staffing. So they kind of provide different aspects, the technology librarian and versus the library assistant 1s and 2s. I will say that the technology librarian has also been something that we have requested. It was in our unmet needs last year, is also in our future planning for FY24. So it is something that we have been advocating for as well.
All right, Ms. Connolly.
Hi, Ms. Carroll. Thanks for being here. My question is just about how are the current hours working now? When it first happened that library hours were reduced, there was a bit of panic in the community that this wasn't going to work and we weren't going to be able to serve the people as we needed to. But now that you've had that going for a bit, can you tell us how it's working? So is there really a need to increase to 56 hours or 50 hours, or are we okay where we are right now? How are people reacting to our new hours?
So the public's reaction to the new hours, you described a panic. However, we have not seen that. There was some surprise initially, and then moving forward, we have received a couple of comments by email requesting the hours to be increased on the weekends. But by and large, it's been a positive feedback on the hours, and we have received comments of appreciation for being open consistently at 10 o'clock in the morning. So you don't have to remember what time we open in the morning every day. It's 10 a.m. When we're open. And we have seen for Sunday mornings, we've seen quite an increase. Staff have been very surprised that so many people have decided or want to come to the library that early in the morning. So they are there, they are coming. Prior to when we made the hour switch, we did look at the data, and on Saturdays and Sundays between 3 and 6, when we were open till 6 p.m. On Saturday and Sunday, we did see quite a drop off between the hours of 3 and 6. So our height on Sundays now is between the hours of 10 and 11 a.m. And on Saturdays, it's a little bit later. It's more towards between probably 10:30 and 12. But there is a peak sort of after the farmer's market. And then it at going towards 3 p.m., it does start to drop off. and staff have been had a positive response to the hours as well. I think you also asked about adding 56 or 58 hours. So I think the 56 or the 58 hours we would look at adding to the weekends. We would capture, I think, a majority of the people who might come in on Saturday and Sunday. Between that 3 and 4 hour, we would see the highest return. And then after that, there is quite a steep drop off.
So if you had 2 more hours, you would add 1 hour on Saturday and 1 hour on Sunday in the afternoons.
Correct. We would
Okay. And if you had 4 hours, you'd add 2 hours Saturday and Sunday.
Yes, we would look at Saturday and Sunday.
Okay. But really, it doesn't seem like there's been a terrible impact from 54 hours.
No, not in terms of the weekend. And actually, on the weekends, on Saturdays, Saturday and Sunday are our busiest days.
Right.
Saturdays was more heavily weighted when we were open more hours. However, the people seem to have redistributed themselves, and we are still doing about roughly the same traffic on Saturdays and Sundays. Saturdays is a little bit fewer, but Sundays being open at 10 a.m. has made up the difference.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jenny.
Sure.
Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. I think Dave Snyder covered a lot of the questions I had, but to make sure I'm understanding, so the library tech FTE would not be fungible to do the service things required for the hours part. Is that correct?
Correct. We would want that person to assume tasks around technology in the library.
Okay. And I know that frees up staff, the other staff who are probably overburdened, but it doesn't allow those staff then to work on extra library hours?
That would primarily relieve our management team staff who are extremely overburdened and who already have many, many tasks. They already do sit on the desk quite a bit. And I will say that nearly all employees, except for the custodians, at one point or another, do service desk provision. So even myself and my administrative assistant, because we have all worked on the service desk. So there are times when we, pitch hit for people.
Okay. And how much was the new FTE for the library tech? What was that number again?
So for the technology librarian, I believe 80,000 is currently budgeted for that. I think I'd have to look up what I put in the unmet needs because it was for a certain pay grade. And of course, adding in benefits as well. And I want to say it was more in the $100,000 range.
Okay. So if we were to support the 80,000 that's in the manager's budget, you would recommend putting it towards the library technology person and not the hours based on the question that Mary Beth had. Is that right?
So I do support, I'd like to say I support both. I support both the technology librarian and adding staff that would increase, at least to 56 hours. And that's why I provided the different options.
If you had to choose, and we said between the 80,000 for the library technology person that Wyatt's funding, or one of the options here, based on kind of your assessment of the community's needs, your staff's needs.
Yeah. I think I put in the technology librarian. We have several projects that are coming up. We have more technology that staff are having to do the provision for. So I think I'd say the technology librarian. And it is something that we've been discussing for a couple of years now.
Thank you. That's it.
Sure.
So I've got a couple questions and comments. One, let me ask you just so I understand. So to go, it's 54 hours now, correct?
Correct.
And to go to 56, that's 2 hours a week, and that would be $63,000 at a minimum. So, right, is that correct? So that would be 2 hours a week times 52 weeks is 104 hours per year of extra library hours for $63,000. So you're basically talking about $600 an hour to keep the library open for 2 hours more a week. That's how I figure it. Is that accurate, roughly?
I haven't done that math, but Sure.
I got to say, with all due respect, that seems like an awful lot of money on an hourly rate to keep the library open for a couple hours. That's not even including the other things, capital cost or whatever. That's just pure labor cost, or at least it appears to be, which seems really excessive. Personally, I can't imagine. I presume somebody's doing the technology function now, right? I mean, when the computers break down or something breaks down, I can't imagine you guys just say sorry. So I can't imagine that the library tech wouldn't allow other library people to do other things other than the tech things that presumably somebody's doing now. And so what I would recommend or suggest is that we find a way to get that tech person to be efficiently utilized to free up some people to go ahead and expand the hours so that you'd have a tech person there, and then also we'd be able to expand these hours, because I don't see good value in $600 an hour keeping the library open for 2 hours more a week, nor going to 4 hours. It looks like it's essentially the same thing, $600 an hour for another 2 hours to get to 4 hours a week. I mean, the bottom line to me, the library is about delivering services to customers, to patrons. That's the bottom line. And so I guess I want to see some bang for the buck. If we're going to spend more money there, I'd like to see our hours get closer to what they were. So I would support or want to see if we can to try to find a way to have this tech person be there, but also free up hours for other people to go ahead and simultaneously expand hours in some capacity to the other. But that's just my 2 cents. So I don't know if anyone else has any additional thoughts. I know most people have already spoken, but
if I could just jump in, if the council's direction is the bottom line is you would like more hours open, then I think maybe we could go back with staff and just, okay, let's figure out what's the best way to do that. And I think it's going to be the library assistant positions. But at any rate, we could come back to council and say, if that's the most important thing to council, then we'll come back with the best staffing solution for that. And we'd be happy to do that. I would just say, as a general rule, that as a general statement, that I think our library team is, bar none, one of the most effective management teams in the entire city. And so in kind of all respects, I'm always going to be very deferential to the library team's best thinking on how to make these types of decisions. I was an advocate for the technology position, partly because it did come up last year, because I did have an interest on how that could serve the whole organization from a technology perspective. And so that was really, I think, kind of a fundamental piece of that that I do want to make clear. This year, the initial proposal was the additional staffing to address the hours issues, and we kind of shifted it through internal discussions of, with which I was a party to those. So I just wanted to state that we'd be happy to come back with the best solution on increasing hours.
Okay, I think that sounds reasonable. I've got a few comments here. Ms. Hiscott, then Ms. Connolly.
Yeah, I just wanted to actually go the other direction, in that my instinct is to go with your original approach of hiring a technical or a library technical person so that a lot of those issues can be addressed. That's what I'm hearing is the first priority. Then you can free up the staff who's more focused on the literature, the programs, the purchasing, etc., more library focused, and have more time to do that. And I think that when we address the technical issues, then we can see if that does free up any of the staff to, maybe things become so much more efficient that staff has more time for hours. I'd like to do that approach first if we're going to do one or the other. And then you can see how much time that FTE saves and provides options for the library staff, library assistants to do non-technical work.
Ms. Connolly?
100% with Ms. Hiscott on that one. And also just want to say that, as Mr. Shields said, the library staff is such a great team, and Jenny has been such a great leader, and I trust her expertise and experience with working with the staff, keeping staff when other departments have been losing staff. So I think that's a really important variable as we go forward as well. But I agree with Ms. Hiscott on that one.
Mr. Duncan?
100% agree with Ms. Hiscott, as seconded by Ms. Conley.
All right. Well, you've got some conflicting, Miss Leon.
Yep. I'd love to add more hours, but fiscally, I did the same math that Mayor Tarter did, and it's just got to be more salient of an option than what's presented here, right? For the extra 104 hours out the nose at 663K for just the first option. Just fiscally, it's hard to explain, right? So, you could staff aug that and come in, and see if you can get it cheaper. We did that at DC Public Schools, right? So we didn't staff that with FTE. So I would really welcome your thoughts here, Wyatt, on potential options that have a better cost palette, presentation on this, because it's tough to swallow. With respect to Jenny and the great team, I'm just looking at this fiscally, right? And looking at this page and the numbers don't feel quite right to me for the benefit that we're looking for, which is 104 hours extra in a year.
All right. So Wyatt, I think you got some things to be thinking about. I don't know if you have a response now or you want to spend a little time working this through a little bit more and come back.
If I could work with Jenny, and then we could circle back next week on what our, I think this has been a very helpful discussion, and we'll come back next week with, I think, a final recommendation.
All right, that sounds good. Why don't we move on to the next sub item on our budget list?
Okay. So a question at the work session last week was, does this budget fund new initiatives in the area of deploying technology to help with traffic safety throughout the city? And one of the questions was specifically about deploying speed cameras, which we are now allowed to do under state law for school zones and in construction zones, with limitations on both. The school zones being specifically, those cameras can be activated during the times that you would see the flashing lights for 25 miles per hour, which is basically a half an hour before students come to school, and then they are off during the middle of the day, and then when students leave school, they can be turned on again. So we do have a feasibility study that will occur this month, and we'll have a consultant that will come in that we'll look at where our school locations are, and those include Haycock Road, South Oak, West Broad Street for the St. James School, and North Cherry for Jesse Thackeray. And so we'll get some answers based on that feasibility study. We do, and we'll see how it goes. For each of these streets, they all have issues associated with them. Design that really does have a very strong restrictive impact on speeding in each of these locations, with the possible exception of West Broad at St. James. We do have a traffic signal, so that obviously limits the potential for speeding there. But when you do have the green light or people chasing an orange, there is undoubtedly instances of speeding on West Broad and probably at the other locations, but Oak Street obviously is closed when school is coming to and from, and there's some other limitations on the other streets. But so that's underway. Now, in terms of staffing, Council did approve last year a half-time position that would be intended to be a retired uniformed police officer that would help with the certifying of any violations, and so far that position, we've had a couple of issues with that, but I do want to just acknowledge the council did provide that additional resource in the budget last year. We do have growth in the area of camera enforcement, and specifically our school bus program, which began with 8 buses with the photo technology for people who pass a school bus when the lights are flashing illegally. And that has been expanded now to 17 school buses. So that program has been expanding in coordination with the schools. And so that's, one part of the workload that we have right now with staff and administering those violations. Our Deputy Chief, Major Jawan Chetri, is on the call, and so I'll stop there, and any questions, we'll try to jump in and respond to those.
All right, welcome.
Thank you.
Do you have any presentation you'd like to make, or just here to answer questions?
I'm just here to answer questions if there are any.
Okay, great.
Or correct the city manager if the city manager stated anything incorrectly.
No, you're right on.
All right, Ms. Hardy.
Thank you. So I'm very supportive of this one as well. Based on the Q&A, Wyatt, make sure I understood. We currently have staff to expand one red light camera intersection, but to implement the speed camera, that's when we would need additional resources. Is that correct?
Well, let me ask Mr. or Deputy Chief Chetri to answer the staffing question.
So there are two intersections right now that has red light. We're thinking about the third one, which is South Washington Annandale. But then as far as staffing is concerned, like Mr. Shields said, the school cameras, bus cameras were 7 went to 17 to 18. So that's taking a lot of admin time for our patrol officers. So the part-time position we're talking about that person, he's here probably a year or two max, and he's got some health issues. So him being in front of the computer and reviewing the violation is a problem for him right now. So he's assisting our CID in other capacities. But if we were to extend with these 4 locations we talked about, we're going to need staffing to be able to review those violations and approve.
So I'm looking at page 27 of 31 on the budget Q&A. It says red light photo enforcement program can be expanded at a reasonable pace. We have the ability to increase our assets by at least 1 more intersection in 2 directions at current proposed staffing. If we wanted to add more than 1 intersection for photo enforcement and speed cameras, it would take at least 1 more FTE. So why, in terms of like numbers, is that like 100,000 if we wanted to implement one of these 4 intersections for speed cameras after the feasibility study?
So for, again, let me defer to Major Chetri. I think 100,000 is probably about right, but
yes, it's about right. Yeah.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Ms. Conley and Mr. Snyder.
Thanks, Mayor Charter. My question is about the location of these speed cameras. You have one on Haycock for the middle school, high school, and I'm wondering why it isn't on Leesburg Pike. Is that because that's in Fairfax County? And my second question is, Oak Street has, most of the cars on Oak Street are in the rear side going in the Seton Lane entrance. And could it also be there, or do we only have enough money for 5?
As far as study is concerned, if you'd like, we can add that location as well for the study. We will have 2 vendors conducting the study. However, there has to be some distance for vehicles to be able to take the speed so that camera can't catch speeders. So at back at South Oak, if you look at it, there's a stop sign. There's a 3-way stop sign and another stop sign on the other side. So
right.
That location, it's going to be very, very tough for speed cameras.
The problem with South Oak is that during arrival and dismissal, it's blocked. So there wouldn't be any cars on it.
Absolutely.
Right.
And not only that, there are stop signs up right on top of the hill and on Parker, So there are stop signs as well. And you're right.
But people, I know people definitely speed when it's not school in session or when it's not arrival and dismissal and the buses aren't there. But I don't think this wouldn't apply to those times, would it?
Yeah,
Could
you're
it be could it be used when it's not arrival and dismissal?
No, it's we're limited
Okay.
by the General Assembly's law.
Yep.
And
Okay.
so all of these problems that you're pointing out is we're aware of those problems, and we kind of raise them just so the council is aware that it's quite possible that the feasibility study is not going to be favorable towards installation at least 3 of these 4 locations. We think that kind of our own assessment that that's a possibility.
And then what about Leesburg Pike by the secondary campus? Is that in Fairfax County?
That's going to be Fairfax County, yes.
Okay. And I guess
So I think that's worthy of writing a letter and seeing if we couldn't have some interjurisdictional cooperation on that.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah. Thanks.
Mr. Snyder, followed by Ms. Hardy.
Yeah, so let me get a little bit of clarification here. So if we want to build into this budget the capability of using the newfound authority from the General Assembly to try to control out of control traffic near our speed zones, Mr. City Manager, how much do we need to build in? How much over and above your budget do we need to add?
So if we were to have 1 additional FTE to assist with the certification of the violations that come in through these electronic devices, we would need an additional $100,000.
Yeah. That's what I need to know. Thank you.
Ms. Hardy?
Yeah, follow-up question to what Mary Beth asked about the location. For Jesse Thackeray, Cherry already has speed bumps, but is East Broad there close enough for it to count?
Not. So that's something the study will determine once the vendors come in. They will be able to answer that. But we had 1 vendor come here a month ago, and according to that vendor, it didn't appear that East Broad would count as school zone. But again, we're getting 2 vendors again to see what our location would look like and where the possibilities would remain.
Got it. I was also going to suggest if private preschools, whether that would qualify. Like, for example, the Episcopal Church has the day school, Hillwood has Easter seals. Like, there's plenty of preschools. Columbia Baptist has ones on North Washington. Like, if private preschools could count, that would also give us kind of more locations if the feasibility study could consider that. I've also talked to the Providence district supervisor, and I think each magisterial district is going to have 1 speed camera. So if we can coordinate potentially with Providence and Drainesville and whoever else is nearby on where these might be, that would be helpful too.
We'll look into that.
Great. Thank you very much.
And can St. James be on that list too?
Yeah, good point.
I'm sorry, what was that again?
I was thinking along the line of private preschool. Sorry, Debbie, jumping in just to tack on to that St. James being right on Broad Street could be a great location, school location.
That's one of the locations that we think will be able to put.
So that's the 800 block. Sorry, I see that there.
Yep, that's the one.
What's the threshold for a ticket? Let's say your speed limit's 25. At what point would you, quote, issue tickets?
That's something we're going to have to sit down with the vendor and come up with the speed range.
Okay, so that's a decision you all will make. For example, hey, the margin of error on these cameras is 8%, so we don't want to issue tickets maybe below 8% above, right? Because they might not either stand up or it's not fair. So you will come up with some number that's above the speed limit before you would be writing tickets or the cameras would be issuing tickets.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the letter of the law, that anything over the posted limit is a violation. However, yeah, that's something we're going to have to go and follow the spirit of the law and then come up with a number. Yes, sir.
Got it. Okay. Other questions? All right. Wyatt, so do you have enough information here from us?
Yes, I think so. And hopefully the council has information. Essentially, this is a potential $100,000 item for discussion at markup. I think the staff recommendation would be to proceed with the speed camera, the feasibility study, and then from that we would then determine the staffing. But of course, the timing of that is awkward with respect to the budget. But I think that's where it is at this point, is to staff it. If it is a robust program, we would need an additional FTE, and that would be about $100,000.
And let me ask you the mechanics of this. And I know some of us spoke to folks at VML on some of these issues. How does the vendor come into play here? In other words, they get a cost. Do they front some of the cost, the capital cost or other costs? Do they take some of the cost off our shoulders, or what's the role of the vendor?
So one of the vendor we just met, his cost is $15 per ticket.
And what do they do for $15 for a ticket?
So they will set up the camera, they will maintain the cameras, but then every ticket we issue, they'll get $15 off of that ticket.
Got it. And the capital costs and other costs associated with it, they pay for all of that, and what we're paying for is a licensed police officer to basically certify the speed on each particular ticket that's written.
Yes.
And when you say $100,000, is this a full-time? Is that like literally all this person's going to do, or are they going to have other duties as well?
Well, if we were looking at the cameras that we currently have, plus adding all these cameras, that person is going to be pretty busy reviewing all these violations, approving them, and then going into these locations for camera issues, checking them, talking to the vendor, getting them here, and all that. So it's going to be a lot of work involved with all these cameras that are coming our way.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you. Let's keep moving then, Wyatt.
Okay. Thank you, Major Chetry.
Sure.
And so the last item that we have slides for is a question that occurred at work session, which was kind of along the lines of a discussion of our available fund balance and specifically our capital reserves, and deploying those for one-time needs in light of the fact that we are on the cusp of executing the ground leases with Falls Church Gateway Partners. And so a couple of thoughts on this that I would just share with council is that I do think that this is a good discussion to do in a planful way in the context of next year's CIP. I do think that it's reasonable to assume that interest rates are going to be going up, and having cash for projects, I think, will be very helpful to the city going forward. And then the second point I would make just very briefly is that with the CIP that the council does have, we are already allocating just in FY23 $6.4 million of grants for transportation improvements. And in addition, we have a part of that is the Sidewalks program and the neighborhood traffic calming program. So one thought that I would have, if the council did want to allocate more money for transportation improvements in the streets, probably our greatest need at this point is in the area of sort of core governmental maintenance of our street facilities. And so we currently have $460,000 built into the tax rate for paving and for sidewalk maintenance. And so if the council were to do more, I would recommend increasing that dollar amount using the contingency of $1,020,000. Any increment of that would be, I think, very helpful to sort of building into that tax rate a stronger repaving program, putting in more pedestrian crosswalks program, because that comes out of that operating budget, and maintenance of our streetscape and our sidewalks citywide. I would recommend that that's where the greatest need is, and we will definitely be able to spend that money and deploy that money with, through our maintenance programs. So I'll stop there and be happy to get council direction on how you'd like to handle this from a markup perspective.
Ms. Hiscott?
Thank you. In reading Kieran's or the staff's reply to the budget request this past week, the number that we have in there for sidewalk maintenance, I believe it was $60,000, and DBW said we need $600,000 in order to do the maintenance that we have. So I wanted to know a little bit more about why we chose to, or why you all chose to put just $60,000 into the operating budget, and kind of get a sense for that, 10x, what's realistic and what we can accomplish with the stuff we already have in order to do that. It was the most surprising thing I saw in the budget.
Yeah, it's not a good number. 60,000 is what we have for sidewalk maintenance. 600,000 is our anticipated need, and similarly, 400,000 is what we currently have for paving, and about $1 million is what we need. And so I'll just say sort of globally kind of what the issue there is, and Mr. Bradley's on the call and he could speak more to it. But for all the really good things that are in this budget, and most of those are in the CIP, this is a budget that is really heavy on grants and a lot of federal and state money that we're deploying. That's kind of the main story of this budget. On the operating side, we have good news on permits, and so we're deploying that permit revenue to really plus up our inspections program. And then almost every other dollar in the tax rate is going for compensation for employees. And so there was really not additional money for things like paving and sidewalk maintenance. That was kind of in that overall guidance where you were not allowed to grow that part of the budget. And so that's where you see an example of that in the budget. So I'll stop there, and I don't know if Mr. Bradley wants to add any different additional context on that.
Yeah, just a couple of quick words, just to clarify what Mr. Shields had said. Historically, our paving budget has been $250,000. The last couple of years, I've been able to work with some of the various DPW divisions to increase that to $400,000. And kind of how often we pave a street terms, we have gone from once every 80 years to once every 50 years. And that was in 2020 dollars prior to the inflation we've seen over the last year and the increase in petroleum and crude oil over the last several months. So we've obviously absorbed a 5% contract increase for this upcoming year. If oil spikes, crude prices go up, that price may increase as well. So that number remains as a flat number. And then the sidewalks are in an additional situation. $60,000 is our historical number of what we have asked for, at least in my time with the city. I can tell you from a kind of a cost perspective of what things cost. Out in front of Harris Teeter, we did about 300 feet of that frontage. We did not install new bricks. We simply relayed existing bricks. And we spent about $25,000 doing about 2/3 of the frontage of Harris Teeter. In conjunction with that, we've got brick paver crosswalks that are approaching their end of their life. We're estimating that based on current contracts to do 4 crosswalks, which is one intersection. It's going to be around $150,000 to $200,000 per intersection. So we've got a lot of stuff coming to do. There's I guess simply put, we can't continue holding the maintenance budgets flat, or it's going to start hurting us on some ADA compliance, and we're going to kind of lose control of the condition of our streets and other sidewalks. So I hope that provides some background.
Yeah, I probably have 10 questions that are coming from this, but I'll let some others answer it. But 2 quick ones are, if we have moved from once every 80 years to once every 50 years, and the industry standard is once every 20 years, what's it cost to maybe split the difference between 50 and 20 years? I'd like to see a couple of ideas about how we can build that up. And then I know why we want this to be part of an operating budget, but are there emergency areas or ADA areas or things we can do that wouldn't be considered annual maintenance that could be used with, capital reserves. Because it's kind of difficult to look at $30 million sitting in capital reserves and telling people we can't have a sidewalk they can walk, bike, stroll, move down. I, for one, would rather be spending, not going so deep on a tax rate cut and having sidewalks and streets that people can access and use. And so I'd like to see several more options and how much it would cost and what else we would have to, or what other areas we could give up. I know you said most of it's salary, but if we're looking at, adding FTEs when we don't have sidewalks and streets that are up to date, maybe we just need to balance them a little bit more. So I see there at least 3 other people have questions. I'll come back to mine if they haven't asked. Thank you.
And I think those are great points. I'll just say very briefly, that's why we have, $6.4 million in grants for this year, which is all geared towards making those improvements that you're talking about, and $78 million over the 6-year planning period. So we have a transformative CIP to do the things that you're talking about that are largely grant funded.
Then I guess I just need more explanation of the delta between the 60,000 and 600,000. If we have $78 million in grants, but we're still $540,000 short annually to maintain what we've been, when staffs were so hard to get in grants. I want to make sure that we're building up a maintenance budget that can support that $78 million worth of CIP that you guys have so aggressively gone after and won. So I want to keep that in mind too. Okay, sorry, I'll let somebody else talk.
Ms. Conley?
Yes, thank you. Okay, 3 questions. Wyatt, I'm looking at this slide that's on the screen right now, and I see the blue lines and I see the red line and the purple line. I don't see the green line that says unassigned fund balance. Is that on the chart and I just don't see it?
So this chart really just has all of the available fund balance together. And so Kieran, I don't know if you have that one handy or just what the capital reserves are versus what unassigned fund balance is.
It may be hard to see on the screen, but I think the green and purple are overlapping, so I was trying to enlarge it.
Oh, okay. So our unassigned fund balance is exactly at 17% of expenditures.
That's correct.
Yeah, so we typically, with year-end dollars, if there's anything a surplus at the end of the year, we'll move it to capital reserve so that the unassigned fund balance basically stays right at policy.
Okay. So, and over the years, we've had lots of conversations about not having too much in unassigned fund balance, and it has been moved to capital reserve. So I have a question on unassigned fund balance, but I also have questions on sidewalk maintenance. So I'm going to start with sidewalk and then come back to that. So my sidewalk question is, further on the agenda, we are going to discuss a paving contract with Fairfax Water, where they do paving of streets that they take up to do water projects. How many miles of that do we do every year? Does that help our paving budget?
Yes. So partnering with Fairfax Water is something we really just started last fiscal year. It's not something we have traditionally done, but we did start it. We do get a bit of a cost break on it. So Fairfax Water does a significantly higher amount of paving work than we do. So we kind of get a quantity discount, so to speak. Generally, I think last year it was around 5% cheaper than what we could do it. This year it looks to be about 10% cheaper than what we can do it. It's not hugely significant, but it is cheaper to do and partner with them. We're splitting mobilization costs, which are the same, splitting kind of maintenance of traffic. There's a lot of costs we end up splitting, which is where we're really saving that money at.
Okay, so let's do that as often as we possibly can, because that means our water is improving and our roads are improving. And what about the quality of the work they do?
Yeah, it's still overseen by the exact same folks who would do it if we handled it internally. So we have not had any issues with quality in terms of aesthetics or kind of useful life of it.
Okay, so then the way the budget is set up, some of the money that we have set going into paving is is going to go to this contract. Yes?
That would be correct, yes.
Okay.
I will say this year is a bit abnormal. Fairfax Water had, I want to say around a dozen water main breaks on Lincoln within like 24 hours.
Right.
So there was a whole lot of stuff that they accelerated a couple of years to take care of that. So we did see a rather large spike this year. I don't expect that trend to continue. So I would say we're probably in the realm of about 100,000 to 200,000 that we'd be able to partner with them a year on. I think this year we're up 300,000-ish, plus or minus.
Okay. And then my other concern is just those brick crosswalks and brick sidewalks and the maintenance cost and the fact that this is in our streetscape plan and that we have to do this. And I'm just wondering if there's better options. A stamped sidewalk, a stamped crosswalk that would require less maintenance long-term, as well as be safer for people crossing the street and more ADA accessible. And how do we go about looking at that in the future so that we aren't spending unnecessary money on a brick sidewalk that you said you did a third of the area in front of Harris Teeter or 2/3 of the area? How much would that have cost had it been a stamped concrete sidewalk?
Yeah,
You probably
so
don't know that off the top of your head, but
yeah, so I don't know if I know the numbers off the top of my head, but I will note that Mr. Shields had previously noted that we do the bricks, both crosswalks and sidewalks, as it's part of the streetscape plan. So that is something that would have to be updated with council approval, probably through the council work plan. But to get to kind of your core point of bricks versus other alternatives, kind of speaking to it, kind of the other extreme in terms of maintenance, you could do something like a stamped concrete. And quite frankly, if we had stamped concrete, we would not have had to do the maintenance out there, right? That the pavers don't shift, they don't move around. That does have a higher initial cost than the pavers. In terms of cost benefit through the life of it, I can't really speak to that. I don't have those numbers. It's very location specific. Right. I can tell you out in Blue Ash, Ohio, pavers are more expensive long term. I couldn't tell you specifics to Falls Church or Northern Virginia, though.
Right. Okay, but there is something in the budget this year for fixing the ones on Hillwood in that neighborhood that are brick. Is that right?
So we have $60,000 in total for sidewalk maintenance. We do.
You froze, Zach.
Cut up.
Zach, we can't hear you at the moment.
Not intent. Oh.
You may want to cut your video, and that may allow you just to do audio.
Yeah, we'll try that. Can you all hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, so we will be touching on some of the sidewalks in Whittier. That $60,000 will not be exclusively dedicated to that neighborhood. A portion of it will go to sidewalk grinding. I don't have the list of streets handy. If anybody would like to see that, I can dig that up and happy to share that out with you. I'm going to say there's about 12.5 streets on it that we'll be doing sidewalk grinding on.
Okay. And then my other question is fund balance. So I'll save that for the next topic.
All right, Ms. Hardy, then Mr. Snyder.
Thank you. So starting with kind of where Wyatt started on this, which was kind of needing to fund a lot of the core maintenance things with our transportation program, I wholeheartedly agree, especially seeing the numbers in there about how we're currently only funding 60,000, but we think we need 600,000. That doesn't feel right. And frankly, I kind of have deja vu from about 4 years ago when we said, hey, we're doing all these transformational big CIP projects like building a new high school and library and city hall. And I specifically remember during budget conversations, I asked, can we make sure we have operating dollars to maintain all the big new stuff? And that's important. Like, it's important to build the big new stuff, but we have to have money to maintain it. And so the fact that, when I walk the streets, I see the bricks that need to be replaced in our crosswalks, and I see, the bumpy sidewalks that are ADA, tripping hazards, like that's not acceptable. So I would like to see that funded. That said, I'm also looking at this page on slide 8 and page 60 in the budget book. And when we're staring down $30 million, potentially another 8 coming from the Virginia Tech deal. And Cindy, does this include ARPA or the unspent part of ARPA? or does it not include it?
The ARPA, I do not believe, is in the fund balance. Ms. Bawa, can you confirm?
Yeah, that it's not available. Fund balance includes unassigned fund balance, permit reserve.
Okay, that's what I think. And how much is unspent and unallocated in ARPA right now?
Of the 18 million allocation that we have with the 2023 appropriation request that we have right now, we would have a remaining balance of close to 2 million.
2 million. So that's 30 plus 8 plus 2, that's $40 million. And so I have a hard time looking at a constituent explaining why we can't repair the sidewalks or frankly build new sidewalks when we're looking at that amount of money. I understand that there's a lot of unknowns out there between inflation, risk of recession, but we are way, way above our 30% target or 20% target. Actually, we're at 30% currently. And so even if I assume that the Gateway Partners isn't going to come in with $4.5 million in the next week and a half, and all signs point to yes, that they are going to follow through on that. I think we have a very, very healthy fund balance, and I think we should, not be afraid to use some of it to get to a lot of these top community needs. I agree with you, Wyatt. We don't want to go on a spending spree without some thoughtful planning like we did on ARPA. But I think the needs that we're hearing from our community around sidewalks, bike lanes, environmental, sidewalk repairs, signals, intersections, things that we've been bringing up, at least in my 6 years on council, really need to get more priority and more attention. And I'm even willing to use some of that money towards, say, term limited positions, help get them done, not just kind of capital improvements, but also positions to actually implement those projects. And I think for this first year, let's not be too ambitious. I'm thinking at most a couple $1 million out of this really healthy fund balance plus ARPA would help deploy against those community needs, because we can't be talking about 8.5 cents decrease, but still a $700 increase in their property tax bill, but not be responsive to these needs that we have so many emails about. So I'd encourage us to think critically about this fund balance that we have, whether it's again ARPA, capital reserves, or the 1 million contingency set aside. I prefer to get to all those core maintenance things with one-time money because we have so many needs out there. Like the fact that we're on a 50-year paving cycle is just not acceptable. And so I'd like to do that with one-time money, get contractors in, let's bang these projects out, and be responsive to our constituents.
Mr. Snyder?
Thank you. So let me understand this chart in front of us. So how much is in the capital reserve right now?
Sure, sorry. Yeah, so at the end of fiscal year 2022, we are projecting ending balance of 12.1 million in the capital reserve. And at the end of fiscal year 2023, we would draw down 4.7 million. We are getting the payment on the ground lease for 4.5 million. So that would result in an ending balance of close to 11.9 million. That's what's in the projection right now. The chart is on page 61 of the budget, in case Ms. Mester wants to pull it up, if anybody wants to see that, of the budget book. And that's the capital reserve.
So the capital reserve is a very sensitive issue, isn't it, for our bond rating?
Sorry, Cindy, not Q&A, the other one, the book, budget book. Sorry, Mr. Snyder.
Yeah, so the capital reserve is pretty sensitive right now against what is our outstanding debt?
So that's also part of that document that you're in right now. So, well, I mean, we just did the high school. So the total general fund obligation bonds is 180 million, 179.6. That's on page 63 of the budget.
Right. All I'm trying to do is get some of these capital funds straight so that people understand the context. So against $179.6 million in debt, we have a capital reserve of 12 million that we plan to spend down to potentially 7 million, with the hope that we'll get the payment that'll bring us back up to 12 million. Right.
Good summary. That's right.
Against 179.6 million in debt. Okay, that's one element of the reserve. Now, undesignated fund balance, how much is in that? Over and above, I'm not talking about the capital reserve, I'm purely talking about the undesignated fund balance.
So the undesignated fund balance is very close to a 17 million number, which is 17% of our total budget. And that is, according to the traditional policy, that the floor is 12%, at least 12, and the ceiling is 17. So we're right at target on that one.
Right. Do we have any other reserves?
The current available fund balance includes the unassigned fund balance, the capital reserve, and the permit reserve. The permit reserve, oh, thank you for pulling that up, Cindy. So the building permit reserve, if you see in the on the screen under the committed fund balance, we started the year, this fiscal year, with the balance of 2 million. We have a planned use of a little shy of 450,000, and resulting in a net balance by the end of current fiscal year at 1.6. We do have, looking at projections forward for that, some major projects where we are going to be getting some funding. And if you recall, in the city manager's proposed budget, we are adding 6 positions from that, the intake of permit fees from large projects that we're expecting before the close of this fiscal year. So
I don't think we've ever added 6 positions to a department before for any purpose. So interesting. Okay. So that's it, right? So if worst case happens, we've got 17 million plus 12 million. We've got 29 million against $179 million in debt. Am I reading that right?
that's correct.
So when people talk about removing money from fund balance or from any of these reserves, keep in mind that you're taking money out of what's already a minimum in money to cover an historically high level of debt in the city of Falls Church. Just a point of caution. Thank you.
Ms. Leon?
Didn't we do an assessment for where a benchmark, right, with other districts for where we are in our capital reserves? I was just flipping through the budget Q&A, and am I wrong in not seeing that? And if so, to address Mr. Snyder's topic there on the capital reserve, is it benchmarked in terms of funding with other jurisdictions?
So as Ms. Balma's,
Yes.
I'll just jump in. This has been a subject of quite a bit of policy discussion through the years.
Yeah, that's
And
what I
so we
thought.
have done benchmarks. I don't think I haven't looked at this year's data on where our neighbors are on fund balance and capital reserves. When we looked at it last, it is as you would expect. The smaller jurisdictions have larger unassigned fund balance and capital reserves, and the larger jurisdictions, typically as a percentage of their budgets, Fairfax County is well over $1 billion a year budget, and so they do not maintain 30% of that in fund balance, but they do maintain rainy day reserves and a number of mechanisms to serve as shock absorbers to any economic disruptions that they have. And ours, just as a small jurisdiction, can be more severe typically than the larger jurisdictions.
Yeah. I really, my thoughts as I'm listening to this, right, it's just not right to fund maintenance of sidewalks at 65K. It's just woefully short. I understand that, we've got SIP allocation, and that there's a distinct, financial definition between what qualifies for SIP and maintenance, in some cases does not qualify for SIP, and therefore you're going to need to put some local money, for maintenance. So I would be totally supportive of allocating additional funds to up that for sidewalks above 65K. I think the one thought that I want to put out there is the estimate of 600K. I want to make sure that when we put out that estimate, that we can execute against it, right? So the question for staff is, on that 600K estimate, are you going to be able to use it? Or is it, if you calibrated the ability to execute and actually use the money, right, and not leave any left over, is it more like a 400K ask? Is it a 500K expenditure? And that was my question for the sidewalk.
And let me ask Mr. Bradley to respond to that.
Question, being 100% honest with everybody on council, if you gave DPW a total of $600,000 for sidewalks, I do not have the staffing to oversee that level of a program. If you look at the
Zach, you're sort of fading in and out.
Unfunded needs.
Sound wise.
All right. So I'm going to try and turn on a hotspot real quick, but I'll keep talking. So yeah, if
Zach, we lost you again.
Yeah. I don't want to hear this.
So this is an important question for the director to answer. Sidewalks, I think, probably are a bit more hands-on for the work because it's it's a bit more granular. The paving program, by contrast, is easy. It is a lot easier to spend that money. You just go through your list of streets that don't have gotten the worst grades, and that work, those dollars will get spent.
Wyatt, my ask simply is, for sidewalk maintenance with current staffing, what exactly is the estimate that you're going to need to align to current staffing? Is it 400K? Is it 200K? Is it 250K? That's kind of the base that I'm looking for, the baseline answer that I would love to have when we're trying to decide how much more to allocate above the 60K per year in maintenance and total sidewalk maintenance.
Mm-hmm. So we'll get back with you on that number precisely. In my discussion with Zach today, in terms of trying to respond to this question about the use of capital reserves, and kind of my initial pitch of keeping this maintenance activity in the tax rate so we sustain it, we were thinking of just doubling both. If we were to ask the council to approve something, it would be to double the paving and to double the sidewalks. So take that 460, which is the combined of those two, and double that to 920. That was our thinking when we were discussing this earlier.
And I believe Mr. Bradley is back in the meeting.
Hello? Is he on mute?
Ms. Nestor, you may want to project slide 11, just to put perspective.
All right, can everybody hear me?
We can.
All right, excellent. So what I was saying was, if DPW were granted the full program at $600,000, we do not have the staffing levels to implement that on a large scale immediately. We would definitely prefer a phased-in approach to increase that over the next few years. I will also note that if you look at the unfunded needs request on the budget sheets, You'll notice that there are several staffing positions that are ranked ahead of programs such as increasing the paving program, increasing sidewalk maintenance. That is done specifically so that we have adequate staff to put towards those increase in projects. Admittedly, they are a bit of a guess right now in those terms, given that we are bringing on a plan reviewer position, and we're not quite sure the full impacts and availability that'll create with the engineering group. So we definitely have capacity to start increasing. I just don't want to overcommit the department.
And that 445 that I'm looking at, why you're assuming that current staffing would work? Or is that the 445 assume some unfunded staffing needs that Zach's talking about?
I think that what this proposal would do is add roughly $400,000 to paving and $45,000 to sidewalks. So, Mr. Bradley, would you have the staffing right now to administer that change, just hypothetically, if the council were to move in that direction?
Yes, we have no problem on staffing with adding the $445,000 to the proposed budget. We can definitely handle that.
And when I say, just one other note on the paving, we often talk about bike lanes and crosswalks, and it is generally our recommendation to put those in when we pave a street, because applying that paint on old asphalt, usually you get about six months best case before you can't really see those markings very well anymore. And so that's why we've been in that mode of putting those new markings down when we repave. So that would be part of that proposal as well.
Okay. No more questions for me. Thank you. That helped.
Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. I wanted to go back a little bit to what Letty was talking about earlier and total up the blue bar page graph. So as I understand it, unassigned fund balance, we're required to keep 12%. We're allowed to keep up to 17. Anything above that is, above that. So the difference between 12 and 17 is 5%, $5 million roughly. And since every penny on the tax rate throws off about $500,000, I think that's right now, that's 10 cents in unassigned fund balance that we could assign to any or all of these pressing needs that we're going through and still be well within our policy. The Falls Church Gateway Partners payment that is going to come due to us very soon is a little over $4 million. So that's 8 cents on the tax rate. Grad Center payment is a little over $8 million. So that's 16 cents on the tax rate. So 16 plus 9 plus 10 is 35 cents. Is that right? On without even counting any of the ARPA money or other monies that might come our way. I think it's important that we go through the list of needs and unmet needs and total them up. And I've been keeping score from home here every time the question arises, how much is that going to cost? And I can't get to any number that's even close to 35. I can't get to a number that's even half that or even a third of that, to be truthful. So I hope that we'll continue this discussion and identify these needs and pave streets more often than once every person's lifetime, and address some of these other pressing concerns, because I think we can do that and provide tax relief to taxpayers who have, after all, helped us earn the good condition in which we find ourselves, and still remain well within the comfort range of our plan of finance for paying off the high school. And to conclude my thought, so the bill comes due on the high school over what period of time? Is it a 20-year or 20-year loan? Is that what we took on the high school?
30, to my recollection.
There's a 30-year bond.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
30
you.
years.
So we have 30 years to pay off. There's not going to be a call on that, next week. Whatever amount of money we owe, we have a generation to pay it off, and that is our plan. And our plan of finance enables us to do that within the bounds of the numbers that I went through earlier. So as I look at the budget, the manager has to answer the question, can we afford this? But from a policy setter's perspective, that's where I'm coming from. I'm wanting to see us meet these needs, which are legitimate, and remain within our plan of finance and our policy guidelines, and still provide tax relief to the taxpayers, which we've gotten a good start on, as I said last week, but we can still go further. I hope that we'll continue in that vein as we get towards markup and a final vote.
Ms. Hiscott?
I just had a quick question on the $445,000 addition on the paving and sidewalks. Then, Zach, what would you, or Wyatt, what would that kind of in that 20-year versus 50-year, where would that bring us in terms of, getting towards that paving every 20-year mark? Halfway there, roughly? Anyway, you don't have to answer now, but that's information I'd like to understand what doubling the request is.
Yeah, I can go ahead and answer that. So the paving program is a fairly linear calculation. So if you were to double the amount of money, you would in essence cut the paving program in half. So it's not quite that, but it's close enough for purposes of budgeting and estimating for future years. So that would put us around $800,000 to get us to a 25-year paving schedule. If you wanted to get down to the 20-year, you're around $1 million-ish, thereabouts. And then once you kind of hit that level of program, you do want to start implementing stuff such as catch basin repair, curb repair, kind of stuff other than repaving of the street, so that you can be a little more organized in what you're doing, where you're doing it, so that you don't have one neighborhood under construction for 3 or 4 years in a row. Because you are at that point, you are doing a relatively large portion of the city. So a little more efficient, a little less disturbance. So that's kind of what takes that program from $1 million in just repaving to, let's say, $1.5 million to kind of cover curb work, catch basin repair, kind of some other odds and ends. We get into a street, we're done that construction season, and we don't have to go back for hopefully 10 to 15 years for anything.
Okay, so paving's linear, sidewalks, higher labor, depends on the intersections, but can you give a generalization of what doubling that would do?
I think it's pretty close. I think it's pretty close to the paving program as well. I think doubling sidewalks, it gets you twice as much work done. And for all intents and purposes, the amount of work that's in town is relatively consistent. Again, what we would probably end up doing is combining that paving and sidewalk money into one large program that would keep staffing burden down, keep it manageable. Also, again, we're going into a street once every 10, 15, 20 years rather than doing constant work 3, 4, 5 years in a row. So, probably stretching a little further just based on sheer number of quantity, unit cost, all of that. But yeah, if you considered both to be linear, that's probably a pretty good estimation.
Okay, so I guess I want to know what wouldn't get done. What is that difference? What's the delta between $120,000 and the $600,000? That is what you'd really like to do. What does that mean? What does that look like? So we can consider when we're making these markup decisions, that we're consciously deciding what we aren't going to do as much as what we are going to do in sidewalks.
Right now, so we're extremely reactive right now. Our grinding program for the streets we will be grinding on, that is based on a complaint list that is generated, whether it's by residents, visitors to the city staff themselves, and then that's hit kind of in the order they're received. So first and foremost, we're going to be expanding that so that we're a little more proactive in getting into streets, getting tripping hazards removed. Obviously, there will still be a little bit of reactivity in there just given the fact that ADA does need to be addressed based on complaints. Kind of the next phase of that is getting into areas like Whittier Circle, where we have pavers that didn't have the best construction being done to them. They're pavers that reside pretty much directly on soil. They've got a lot of heaving, and implementing something that's more long-term sustainable, right? Whether that is working with the neighborhood to do something completely extreme and change it out for maybe regular concrete, whether it's going in and doing a better base and relaying the pavers. We're kind of exploring some options right now, but it's going to allow us to kind of, I guess I'll say, give a permanent fix to solutions rather than a surface or cosmetic fix that's going to last 3 or 4 years before we have to go back.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Hardy?
Thank you. So if we were to double the paving and sidewalks as proposed, does that take care of the Whittier complaint we've been receiving for the past year? Or do you need more money for that?
If we're going to handle it in its entirety, we need a significant amount more money for that. That said, I would not recommend allocating that money. We do want to give a couple of things a try to see what may be long-term sustainable. Based on some initial estimates, the engineering group and I had worked up last year, we could be upwards of $700,000 to $800,000 to get in there and kind of give a permanent fix to that neighborhood. I don't necessarily want to take $700,000 or $800,000 and just perform a solution if there's something that could be a little bit cheaper in there that kind of gives us a similar cost benefit analysis over its lifespan. So the engineering group's actively working on that and kind of exploring some options.
Got it. So like Mary Beth, I'm also interested in just looking at what are better long-term maintenance options for our sidewalks. Like if these brick sidewalks are really costly, if stamped concrete gives us the same look as brick sidewalks, but it's far cheaper to maintain, I'm certainly open to revisiting those standards so that we don't create all this cost for ourselves. So for the 445, does that take care of any like accessibility concerns? So another one that we hear repeatedly about is sidewalk accessibility issues where we don't have enough like passageway. So the one infamous one in our commercial corridor I will not name because we all know it. Does that take care of that? And if not, that feels like one-time thing, right? Like let's just take care of it until we stop getting complaints about it.
Yes, so this money would not solve a corridor of telephone poles and sidewalks. What it would do if we're installing crosswalks, if we're improving curb ramps, something like that, if we're within a few feet of a telephone pole, yes, we would certainly extend that bump out to get around that telephone pole. But this would not cover that length of the corridor. Some of that has to do with just limited right-of-way, right? To go through and truly fix those issues, we need more space, whether we're purchasing right-of-way, whether we're creating space by eliminating parking, narrowing lanes, whatever it may be. And those are all discussions that probably as a kind of higher level view need to take place. At the same time, we would discuss material changes in the streetscape standard, just so we have some kind of general guidance of, do we remove parking? How narrow do we want the lanes to be? Or I guess how narrow could we take the lanes on certain streets is probably a better way to phrase that. And kind of some other ideas that staff have that we've been kind of kicking around, and we've been kind of following some council guidance, which is maybe a bit old and outdated at this point, and would serve staff well to kind of bring that back up.
So if we go back to kind of, again, my advocacy to consider using reserves, whether it's unassigned fund balance or capital reserves or ARPA or future one-time money that we're expecting, I would support accessibility fixes. Like when we talk about walkability, it's obviously we've got to fix the sidewalks, but we have to make sure that we get rid of the obstructions. And so that feels like one-time spending that is well worth it. Also on the list while we're talking about markup that we haven't talked about, Wyatt, is the tree light program. That feels like one time, to invest in it with a contractor, kind of outside resources, and then some sort of internal maintenance, or maybe the contractor also maintains, but at least the one-time capital expense, again, would be another good candidate that we've talked more than enough about. Do we have a rough estimate for either of those?
At this point, we do not. And so the plan is for tree lighting is that we will get bids back. We will have a contract, and at that point, we'll have our year-end financial report. And as I do think that we are anticipating that we will have year-end dollars on the revenue side that we could put to getting the streetlight to execute that contract. And year one will probably be the most expensive year. And so that would be a good use of year-end dollars, and then we would sustain it after that.
My only concern is timing. So every year we're told that if we wait till July, which is when your fiscal year ends, that is too late for the tree lights. And so I don't want to miss another year. This is how we were in year 6 of this.
Yeah, well, the procurement process is underway right now, so I think we'll have the information to make decisions, well in advance of well in time for that contract to need to be in place.
Okay. And what about the BETOS one? So I will name it now.
So we've got two approaches to that. One is to use the grant dollars. We've also discussed using local dollars. Either can work for us. And so we're working with the city attorney just to get that process laid out, and we'll come back to council with a budget for that. We do have, we've been budgeting to get this work done for a number of years. So if we exceed that budget, then we'll need to come back to council for, either if the council were to fund what's proposed here, I think that probably would cover that project. If it didn't, we would come back for a one-time appropriation for that.
Okay. And will that be in time for the budget discussions, or is that on a separate timeline?
It's on a separate track, so we'll let the costs sort of drive that discussion, and if we've got the money to cover it, we'll cover it. If we don't, we'll come back to council.
Thank you. That's it for now.
Okay, it is 9:30, which customarily we take a break after about 2 hours. I guess probably this is a good time to take a break, Wyatt, unless you feel otherwise.
That would be fine. And then maybe we could come back just to have a little bit of a preliminary discussion about the markup process. And then I think that might be it for tonight, unless the council has other items.
All right, let's go ahead and do that. Let's take a break. It's 9:31. Why don't we take a break till 9:40 of recess, a short recess so people can get refreshments and the like, and we'll reconvene at 9:40. Okay? All right, we'll see you guys in a few minutes. All right, it's 9:40. I hope everybody's back. Why don't we reconvene and get going again? Mr. Shields, are you back?
And Mayor, if you just give me a moment. Okay, we just went live, so Granicus is catching up. Thank you.
Sure. Why don't you let us know when we're ready to go?
Sure, just 30 seconds. Okay, Mayor, we're good.
All right, we're back. It's 9:40, and let's get back into it. Mr. Shields, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, and Cindy, maybe if you could put up that slide that we ended on, and really it's just to sort of set the stage for what we'd like to do, what we're hoping to do with council next week, is to get council's guidance on key items that you want to see either added or deleted from the budget. So just as a kind of a mock-up here, what we're listing here is the plus up for senior tax relief. We are noting two items that would be paid for out of ARPA dollars, and that's the $50,000 for emergency relief for refugees, and and then the second one is the request from the chair of the Human Services Advisory Commission to fund all of the needs that came out of the competitive Community Services Fund. Now, both of those items could be funded out of the council's prior allocation of ARPA dollars. The council, as you'll recall, already allocated $150,000 for emergency rent relief. Because the state has taken that over, we don't think we'll expend all of those dollars. And so with council direction, we could use those dollars as part of the effort for emergency rent relief targeted for refugees. And that's a conversation that is ongoing with Welcoming Falls Church. And the proposal there is to provide a rent subsidy after the federal rent assistance runs out that would provide a partial subsidy for rent for these for 5 families in the city. And then the community services funds, that's a whole basket of entities that had applied for funding through the CFF, a community services fund, and this would fund all of their requests in full. Again, using ARPA dollars already appropriated. A new one that was discussed but was not in the council's earlier ARPA budget is $130,000 for weatherization improvements at Winter Hill. And so these two, the 50 and the 30, would be out of the existing budget, so no further council action would be required. And then the 130,000, that would be part of the markup, and we would add that to the budget if the council agreed to that. Then so that's kind of the structure that we would go on. Notionally, we plugged in money out of the $1,020,000 out of the interest of trying to kind of build into to the operating budget a recurring level of effort for paving and sidewalk repair. That's the approach that's built into this, but the council will be the final decider on that. If that were done, then there'd be $510,000 remaining for the council to allocate either towards tax relief or towards other critical needs. So that's kind of the way this will work as the council goes through budget markup. So I'll stop there for any further discussion on that. We don't need to resolve all these tonight, but this is kind of just a look ahead to what we will be working on next week.
Mr. Snyder?
Thank you. A couple additional questions. If we decide not to add the commercial and industrial tax, does that mean then we would have to build back into these numbers that money, which is $470,000? Is that right?
It's $420,000. we had listed it as 403,000. I think in one of my PowerPoints before, the accurate number is 420,000. So if the C&I tax went away, then we would either need to pay for those transportation needs out of that $1,020,000 contingency, or cut spending somewhere else to come up with that money.
So let's assume we were working within your budget. So you've got a contingency at $1,020,000. Based on this initial chart, we're already down to about half of that. So if we decide not to do the C&I tax, that's an additional 470 off, which is, we've basically exhausted the 1 million contingency that you've built in. The next question I have for you then is the loss of the grocery tax. I understand we originally estimated that to be 1.4 or 1.6. We actually now believe it to be 1.8. So we're going to need to find how much money as a result of potentially losing the grocery tax over and above what you've budgeted.
That's correct. I think you've summarized it well. We do still have some remaining risk on that front. And until the General Assembly adopts the budget and the governor signs it, that won't be fully resolved. You know, there's rhetorically, I think all the parties have said, at least in the short term, that the local governments will be made whole for the loss of the grocery tax dollars. But at this point, that's really just kind of rhetoric. And but it is somewhat comforting that those statements have been made by virtually all the parties. But again, no deal has been done.
Right. So again, starting with a contingency at 1 million, removing 510, removing 420, and then removing an additional, 400,000. We're already have gone through the contingency and we're into finding additional money. Is that right? I'm just trying to do the macro elements here that will drive the framework from which we operate. So that 1 million gets pretty rapidly eliminated by some of these other changes that aren't on this chart. Is that right?
Yes.
Right. So as we go forward, I think it's important to understand that. The other question I have right now is to really a request to Kiran Bawa to reach out to some municipal finance experts and just confirm with them that our current policies are still good, and that if we dip into the reserves, as some have suggested tonight, I don't necessarily disagree with the ideas, but as some have suggested tonight, is that still generally within the range of responsible local government budgeting for a community our size? So if you could do that for me between now and when we take a vote, I would much appreciate that. One other issue, a little bit of modeling here. So our average assessment increase is probably, I don't know what it's been, but maybe we're roughly at average, a little bit below, above or below, I don't know what. But I'd like to model next year with the additional costs, the additional staff, the additional layers of salaries built in, what level of appreciation in property assessments would we need at the current tax rate to support the budget next year, or rather for the following year, that we're building in for this fiscal year? Do you understand the question, Wyatt and Karen?
We do. It's a good question, and we can model that.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions for now. Thanks a lot.
Ms. Connolly?
Thanks. I have a similar question about the C&I tax. I'm concerned that tax kind of came out of nowhere. There was not really preparation in the business community or even among city council as to whether we wanted that tax or what that meant. And I see we got a message from the EDA that they are opposing it. I know why it presented to the Chamber of Commerce, and I'm assuming they are also going to have some concerns with it as well. And I'm wondering if we take that money out, Wyatt, could we move some money from the unassigned fund balance to cover it for this year and then do a study for the next year to see what that means and get people on board for understanding what that means before we impose it?
Yeah, I would recommend against that. If the decision is not to do it, then I think we should just solve the problem within the tax rate and not dip further into reserves. And just remember, we already have a very aggressive use of reserves to cover our debt service. And that was done in a planful way as part of the plan of finance for the high school, but I would not recommend it for replacing a proposed tax.
Okay, so then another way to look at it is just to take it off the table completely. And that would...
Sorry, if I may add, so if we did not do the CNI, we are required to do the equivalent in the amount of 1.1 million as we have built it in the tax rate in the past years in order to leverage our NVTA 30% and 70% funds. So we would be required to build in that 420,000 either out of the contingency or some other place within the tax rate.
And I don't believe it can be contingency because they're looking for ongoing financial commitment, the way the code reads. And the NVTA 30% has been averaging 1.2 million, so you would lose what we have for transportation already built in the CIP for like WMATA and so forth, and reduce your NVT allocation by whatever sort of pro rata share we go down.
So by eliminating a $420,000 CNI tax, we would actually lose 1.4 million?
Right now, if you don't do the 5 cents, you would still have 7.5 cents in the tax rate for CNIE, so you wouldn't lose 100% of the NVTA 30%, but formula's complex, but it would probably round about 450,000 loss of NVTA. So you would lose basically 800,000 because you'd lose the 5 cents as the CNI and you'd lose the NVTA. And that's already programmed in the proposed CIP before you, so we'd have to adjust downward.
Ooh, I think we need a lot more education on that one because I know you went through all that, but I didn't fully understand that till right this moment. Why the contingency, the $1,020,000 contingency on this slide, is that the same as the grocery tax money or not?
The idea of the contingency did kind of have its roots in the problem of the grocery tax, and then it kind of evolved from there. And the reason it evolved is maybe I personally, when I heard both the Senate and the House say they were going to make local government hold, they kind of receded as an urgent issue, and so I've kind of have viewed that as money that the council really can work with. Others might disagree with that, and I can't say for sure exactly what the General Assembly is going to do, but certainly both the Senate and the House have both, in what they've adopted, they've both kept local government whole. Now, how it finally gets resolved, we just don't know.
Okay, and then my final question regarding that is the revenue sharing agreement. And I said this last week, and I don't see it reflected in here, that we have a revenue sharing agreement with the schools, that the revenue that comes in certain categories of revenue are split 50-50 with the schools. And the reason that works is because then next year when the schools come in with their budget proposal, they know that they're going to be made whole by the 50-50 split. So they're not going to ask for too much. And they have stayed within the budget guidance as we have requested, with the understanding that there's never going to suddenly be some extra money that they're not going to be able to ask for. So I just want to make sure that as we are thinking about this contingency, which is the grocery tax, that we are ensuring that we are also sending some to the school board. They weren't aware back when they planned their budget that this was going to be in there. So they didn't include that at all in their budget. So I just want to make sure that that's included, and I hope my council colleagues will support in that.
Yeah, Budget and Finance Committee was canceled, and I was hoping that we could talk about this. And I understand that I was out on vacation last week, but I do think that that is a conversation we still need to have. I had recommended the week before I went out on vacation for spring break to actually have Budget and Finance Committee to actually talk about this, but we didn't have a means to discuss it. So thanks for bringing it up again, Mary Beth. But I do think we need to regroup. I don't understand why we canceled Budget and Finance, because we do need to talk about things like that in more detail. And I think in our work session with Jack, we had talked about the spirit of the revenue share and doing a version 2.0 of it. So I do think we need to discuss that. Is there a way to put it back to committee?
I think I would not disagree with the need to continue to evolve the revenue sharing agreement. I think in the middle of a budget season, it's hard to come up with a 2.0 when the school board received a number back in December, and it's hard to change it midstream. So that's my concern, Caroline, is that if we change the rules midstream, that's not fair to the school board that went in thinking that these were the rules for the year. If we want to evolve it as we go forward, and I was talking to Mr. Duncan today, and he had some good ideas about reasons why it could be evolved, then that would make sense. And we should set up some budget and finance meetings with the school board to talk specifically about that. But I just think it's unfair to change the rules midstream, because the school board could have come in January and said, no, we need 6.8%. We know you said 6.3, but we want 6.8, which is what would have happened 5 years ago. And that hasn't happened, partly because we've built this trust between us. These are the rules. We lay them out in December, and then we follow through. So that's the part that concerns me.
It's tough because it puts pressure on all of the multiple priorities that our citizens are asking for outside of schools, right? So between looking at increasing tax relief, sidewalks, it's not like it's in concept that it's a bad thing. It's just, it creates that contention, right?
There's always that contention. Yep.
Yeah. So it's a tough one. I just do think that if there's any way to move up the Budget and Finance Committee so we could actually talk about it, right? I do think that there's some opportunity to take a look at how we address it. Currently, I don't think it's too late. We have the intellectual power to do it. We set the agenda, we set the rules, we set the process, when it comes to the budget. So I'm not sure if it's too far out or too late to talk about that revenue share. So I'm not sure if I agree that it's too late to talk about it for now. I think it's still really relevant, which is why you're bringing it up right now. It's very relevant right now. So I'm with you. I'm just asking, let's have a conversation to talk about the revenue share, because I think they're supportive. It's just a matter of where we should discuss that.
And I'll just jump in real quickly on the markup so far. That it's the paving and sidewalk maintenance is arguably the only thing that is probably relevant to that revenue sharing, because that would be a new expenditure.
Yeah.
All the other items would be, I think, outside of that. I'll just make that observation.
Yep, that's the contention that I'm seeing too, is with that line item. So it's hard to pit those two together. Yeah.
Can I just add one more thing? The reason Budget and Finance was canceled was for spring break, and then as Kieran Bawa and I talked about rescheduling, we thought that all the issues that would have been discussed in that meeting were really important for all of council to get involved in. So that is why we decided to cancel it completely prior to budget. We don't usually have one when we're at this point, because it's more about the planning and the getting ready and the reviewing than the actual moment of budget. So that's why we canceled it. There was no deep hidden meaning. It was more that anything we discuss, we really need to discuss as a body of 7, rather than have a side discussion and then come back later and have to explain to everybody else.
Letty?
Thanks. I guess I'll start backwards. So on revenue sharing, so I support the concept, and I think it's been great the past couple budget cycles when it's been in place. I guess what's also worked well is doing some sort of like end of year true up. So if we end up with underspending or extra revenue, being able to share then as opposed to sharing now because of the uncertainty and all the community priorities I think we're hearing. Because I think the other concern is one concept I think that we all support is the idea of parity in terms of salary raises. And I think what we heard from the superintendent that he would use if he got extra revenue is more salary. So I think that would then create pressure for Wyatt to do the same for general government staff. And then we end up with a lot more money that we need to find in the budget. So that would be my concern, is not increasing the operating spending now. And then if inflation continues, I would totally support increasing salaries with some sort of mid-year bonus like we did last year, especially if our revenues come in well and doing the sharing through that mechanism. So that's kind of the revenues part of it. I guess working backwards, I also support Mary Beth's idea of, at the minimum, delaying the CNI, partially because it was really sprung on people. And I think that's a pretty resounding concern we've heard from the community. So at the minimum, not implementing for a year. I guess my question is, obviously, it's got to come out from somewhere. And to make sure I'm understanding why you're saying plugging that 400, 420 for CNI can't come out of the contingency? Like it's on a 1-for-1 replacement? And is that what I heard Cindy say?
No,
I thought this contingency was funded
come out of it could come out of the contingency.
Okay, and then we wouldn't lose the extra transportation funding if we use contingency, because the contingency is funded through the tax rate, right?
Right.
That's right.
It was
Okay,
the
so we
reserve that would be the issue, but not the contingency built into the tax rate.
Got it. So I guess that would be my, red line, is to think about using contingency for that. And then all the transportation things, again, if we're only touching paving once every 50 years, our definition of CIP is over 150,000, a useful life of 5 years or more. A lot of the transportation stuff we're talking about feels like capital to me. And while it's maintenance and we want to have the discipline to make sure it's built into the budget every year, again, I think we have more than enough reserves. So I'd consider the paving and sidewalk maintenance as one time. I'd like to see the addition, I guess while we're talking about red lines, the speed camera program, and be responsive to that so we don't have to spend another budget cycle talking about implementing speed cameras or expanding the red light camera. And then again, on senior tax relief, if the treasurer comes back and thinks that we'd be able to help more people with more money, I think it's a relatively small sum to be able to help a lot more people. I would be supportive of upping that 65,000. That's it for now.
Ms. Hiscott?
Thanks. I'm actually taking a different direction, and I'll circle back to the other topics we've just been talking about, but getting ready for our ESC meeting on Thursday, and on honoring Dan Z and celebrating our lead building tomorrow. And when I look through the budget, we haven't added any. We've talked significantly about greenhouse gas goals. We talked during our work program about all the environmental things that we want to be focusing on. And what we have in the budget is what was already approved on our climate change mitigation and energy action plan, which is great, but we did that at the end of fiscal year 21 using unspent funds. And to my knowledge, we haven't done that yet. There's concern that if we don't do it before the end of this year, we'll be pushing it into another fiscal year without having any staffing assigned to it, because ESC has asked for consulting services for an energy action plan and an energy manager position. And we had previous discussions, and I think several people had said, well, we don't want to have any FTEs assigned before we have a climate action plan in place. But that's already kind of gotten pushed down the line. I'm concerned that of all these things we're talking about, we haven't even mentioned spending on outside of the stormwater on environmental issues, greenhouse gas specifically, energy action specifically, and then requests from, I think it's from our ETS and planning about things that we could be doing right now in our buildings, specifically the community center and the boiler, like redoing the HVAC. We're not doing anything with the boiler. We're keeping that in there. And some other things with windows. There's a long list of things we haven't, I don't think we've added unless I've missed it, anything to our budget this year other than what we'd already approved for the action plan in FY21. So we'll be talking about that in the ESC again on Thursday. I imagine I'll come back next Monday. Just kind of wanted to plant the seed that if this is part of our council work plan, our little cities 2040 vision, if we want to meet any of the goals that we've set out for greenhouse gas reduction, we need to start thinking about that, and we haven't done so far.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan?
Okay, so first on the CNI, I'm a hard no on that. Be happy to share all the reasons, but the hour's late, and y'all are smart enough to know what all the reasons are on no. So, I'd love to devote more study time to it, and EDC or GovOps or Budget and Finance or something somewhere. But at this time, I just think it sends a wrong signal to be imposing a tax on what amounts to our smallest businesses. The big folks have done pretty well during this crazy pandemic, but a lot of the smaller businesses, as we know, are still struggling. And it's hard to know what the secret sauce is that's made us successful economically here in Falls Church in the last 10 years. But the fact that we don't have a CNI when some of our jurisdictions near us do is something that we have to at least discuss. It deserves being discussed. So to begin with that, second, I just want to say that of all the budgets that I've been involved in, the council has on this round done more commendable work identifying service improvement needs on general government than any year that I can remember. And I think that's testimony to the hard work that my colleagues have done, number one. And number two, to the fact that there are some areas where we do, everybody agrees, need to improve services. And I hope that we'll be able to do that in this budget. I wanted to flip my egg timer over and try to keep myself to 3 minutes for, I think, 3 or 4 other things that I would like to see in our budget. Number one, I noticed in the book that we are paying some folks who work for the city as little as $11 an hour. I don't know how many folks we're paying that little or how old they are. But I would like to see us establish a $15 minimum wage for anybody who works for the city, certainly anybody who's an adult. Maybe there are some young folks who are working with the rec program that are making less, but I understand that might have some implications for bracket creep above them for people who are currently making $15 who might need to make a little more. But I would like an understanding of what the costs are that would be associated with getting us up to paying, the kind of wage that you can probably earn by working at Arby's or McDonald's if you're working for the city of Falls Church. Mid-year inflation payment adjustment has been mentioned, and I think that's something that we ought to have on our radar screen. If inflation keeps up at the rate that it is, we want to take care of our people, and that's one way to do it. The issue of schools revenue sharing. Mary Beth and I have talked about this today. I would like to support the call for a demographer to do a granular study of Falls Church. My concern about revenue sharing is not so much the concept, but the actual percentage. I mean, I have a hunch, just a hunch. That's why we need to hire an expert. That the city's population may well increase fairly significantly in the next few years, maybe up to 17 or even 18,000. I'm not so sure that the school's population, the student enrollment, is going to increase at that rate. And so if we are going to have a revenue sharing plan, we need to better understand where the growth and the pressures on services brought by growth land us. And I'd like to share the expense with the schools to do a good demographic study of where we think we might be, and really look at each of the new buildings and how many people live in them and how many students are in them, and understand better who the customers are that we're needing to serve. Finally, there's some information in the budget book about assistant city attorney expenses. I'd like to understand more about that. We've obviously had a lot of outside counsel help on the West Falls project. Maybe that's beginning to decline, but Carol has done great work, and her team of consultants have done great work. My question is, do we need to bring some of that work in-house now to a deputy city attorney who might have a part-time situation with us? And similarly, another area of need is in communications. And finally, I would ask us to consider the news press advertising arrangement that I think we devoted some revenues, some money to at some point in the last year or so. Not sure how that's turned out. Not sure if each of the departments that has advertising, responsibilities, the treasurer and maybe Record Parks and others have been able to spend as much money as they really should to get the word out about the work that they're doing. But news press advertising is something I'd like to see on the list. And similarly, the communications and sort of management situation in the East Wing needs discussion and probably more staffing. Certainly, there's a vacancy there that's been there for a while, and I hope that we're going to fill that very soon. But as we go ahead, I'd like to have a discussion maybe in GovOps about resources that we would allocate to basically somebody who would enable the higher management folks, the manager and the deputy manager, to do their higher managing and position a person, somebody in communications and or management who would, but not too fine a point on it, feed the council members, meet their needs, and also just sort of traffic cop all the many things that go on the general government side. I think we need some help in those areas in particular. All right, I think that's all that's on my list. Oh, and I support Mr. Snyder's good recommendation to source out, by my count, we've got about 37 cents in the various funds and monies that are going to come in and excess above policy and our balances. If we undertake even a fraction of the efforts that we've talked about here tonight, I think we would still have plenty of headroom to be responsibly managing our affairs. But certainly, if there's somebody that can give us an updated look on where we stand in our plan of finance, that would be a good thing to do. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Leon.
Yeah, two things. I had asked a question around, risk management, and I echo Phil's concern that from a legal support perspective, that function is very key to managing risk for us. It also is very important from our affordable housing posture. If we do not fund that function correctly, either through staff or through local dollars to get some appropriate legal advice, the things that we want to do for shared equity and anything that we want to do around increasing affordable housing supply, if we don't do it right, it just increases the risk of the execution. So I want to add that as a markup. And the second point, and the last one I want to add, is I'm very concerned with the CNI. I understand that we need to fund it, right? I'd be supportive of funding it out of contingency, but based on the feedback from the community that I've just gotten on this, right, and taking a look at this from different perspectives, the timing of this is off. If the objective of the city is to support local businesses, we need to walk the talk and have an understanding that they are coming out, of a very tough environment with COVID that's, still under recovery and under economic pressure, right, in this inflationary environment. So I just want to caution, how we proceed with that CNI tax, that we don't send a message that is opposite of what we intend. And if I understand this correctly, we want to support our local businesses here. That's it for me. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. So I know we didn't solve all the world's problems just yet, but I think hopefully, Wyatt, you've got some more direction, some guidance, and maybe you can put together a little bit more a la carte information so that we can sort of further dive into this at our next meeting.
Absolutely. It's been a great discussion and look forward to the next step.
Okay, why don't we quickly go over the consent items?
Okay. And Ms. Messer, are you going to just scroll through the agenda? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So just very briefly, the first one will be the contract with Bates, and this is for picking up the big containers out at the property yard at the Robert Goff Operations Yard. The second one is the contract with Lyft for bike share, and so the request is for authorization above what the expected annual amount will be. Currently, at the city subsidies in the neighborhood of about $117,000, $120,000 per year. We're asking for contract authorization of slightly higher than that, just in case there are cost increases in the out years of the contract.
Wyatt, on that one, not to belabor tonight's meeting, but I guess I would just say as to bike share, if we can try and can lawfully build in an expectation that developers, I know we've done this and I've been one of the advocates for it, hey, pay for a bike share station there. But for the folks who aren't providing bike share stations, but just a contribution as part of their TDM, their traffic demand management plan, it seems to me this is highly logical and related to have this as just sort of a customary contribution so that we can get this off our plate and onto developers' plates where I think it belongs with reduced parking counts and the like.
Yes, sir. So it's on our standard list of things to ask for, but you do make the good observation that we typically ask for both the station and the subsidy, and maybe we could sort of divorce those two and just say we're asking for the subsidy, whether there's a station there or not, and making sure that that's clear going forward. But the last three projects that have gone through have all had that annual contribution, and so we'll continue to look at that and expect that.
Got it. I think institutionalizing that in a rational way is totally appropriate given requests for reduced parking. But anyway,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I knocked you off your stride. What else you got?
Sure. The Renz Branch contract, that's a stormwater project, and this would be a task order with limited utilities limited for that project. The AM Liner contract, that's our program to rehabilitate our sewer lines, and that's really important for keeping water, stormwater inflow and infiltration out of the sewer line. That I&I is what causes backups in people's basements. So this is a very important program that we've been doing for many years, and we'll continue it with this contract authorization. We mentioned this earlier in the meeting, but this is the ability to contract with Fairfax Water for paving restoration. And just real briefly on this, council will recall times when they've been doing water main replacements, and they will naturally pave half of the street, and then the other half of the street, unless we put money into it, will remain with the old pavement. So we are trying to, unless the pavement is really new, which is rare, because usually we're coordinating with them and they're only doing water main projects where we're asking them to focus on streets that have bad pavement. We'll pave curb to curb, and so this contract allows us to pay Fairfax Water to do that. The item F is their assurances under the Title VI program to ensure that our programs are administered equitably, and that all aspects of federal Title VI are complied with in the city. And then lastly, the VDOT land use permits. And what is notable about this amendment is that we are putting in the brick paver crosswalks in part of Route 7, and that's in VDOT land. And so they want assurances that the city will pay for the upkeep of those brick paver crosswalks. So that's the point of that resolution. So that's what's on consent for next week.
All right, any questions about that? How about council schedule or other comments? Mr. Duncan?
Just a question back on the consent. Do we have any metrics, any data on use of bike share in the last, I don't know, since they've been installed or in the last year? Or are we are we working with some kind of data about how much it's getting used?
We do have that data. We can share that with council. We'll send that out by email. I
Okay.
will note that the numbers are very COVID. There was a period, the most recent data set was some periods of time when there just wasn't anybody out on the street doing anything. And so the numbers are artificially low, but we'll share those numbers.
Yeah, okay, good, thanks.
Ms. Hardy?
While we're talking about, I guess, the assurance on the crosswalk, in light of the conversation we just had about the really expensive brick crosswalks that we need to maintain, obviously we're not ready to change what our standards are, but that's just a concern given the lot of time we spent discussing that just now. On Lyft, so I know that they're a big scooter operator as well. Have we gotten any interest on micromobility since, I guess, pre-COVID when we had authorized the program? Is it coming back?
Let me follow up with Carrie and get the latest on that. Unless Cindy, you might be more up to speed on it than I am.
I think it'd be good to follow up with her. I don't have current data. I haven't heard of any vendor expressing direct interest, but we can verify.
And then on recycling, so obviously it's increased usage and increased cost with the dumping, but is that getting offset in any way by the extra recycling that we're sending off? I know that recycling these days is more of a money loser than it is a money maker, but besides the extra expenses, are we making it up on the revenues any?
Let me follow up with you on that. I don't have not seen that data recently either.
Especially with the new glass recycling.
Yeah.
That's working out well. I mean, it seems very popular every time I take my glass there. And if it's
well,
helping.
The glass is one of the big losers, but for paper, fiber, and metal, those markets fluctuate quite a bit, and commodity prices have been on the up. So there might be some good news on that. I'll just need to check.
Okay. And then a non-consent agenda. So I was going to bring up all the sidewalk closures that happened in the past week during spring break for Broad and Washington. I saw that now North Washington is also closed. So obviously the whole stretch of East Broad is closed from the corner down past Applebee's to Lawton. And there's a nice temporary traffic light set up at Lawton. But the sidewalk closure on North Washington, essentially from the corner up just before you get to Thompson, we need to do a better job of marking it, because right now there's a sign that says sidewalk closed, but it's mounted on a pole. And I get that we don't want to obstruct the sidewalk, but literally today when I was driving carpool, like people are walking on North Washington because they didn't realize that they should have crossed earlier, either at the Park Place future median break or at Park and North Washington. So just something to pay attention to. That's a really bad place to have pedestrians on the street itself.
Okay, we'll follow up on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any last words from anyone else? Okay, why don't we call it a night? Thank you all. A lot of good work, I think, done tonight. And why don't we call it a night, adjourn, and reconvene, at least for some of us, Wednesday morning at our weekly mayor's meeting. So good night, everyone. Have a great evening.
Okay.
Good night.
Thank you very much. Good night, all.
Thanks, council.